There's always people arguing about the current state of Deepwoken and what's really killing it. And it always leads back to the same topic. Most of the time people point fingers at unfinished and bad content. But what if I say the real underlying issue here was the weekly update model? Now I know, you must have heard this argument 1,000 times. Both sides of it in fact. That weeklies are good, weeklies are bad. But mainly people argue that while we wait for big content updates, we need weeklies to keep the player base satisfied. But that's my issue. Do we need weeklies to keep us satisfied? I mean, what difference is it to the player count if we get no weekly than a bad one? And in fact, I can go even further and say that most of the time, Deepwoken is better off than no weekly at all than a bad one that ruins the game for a week. But before I rip into the weeklies and break down why it's not good for the game or the community, let's really analyze weeklies and see how it's been working for the community. Because I genuinely believe that there is a better approach that the devs could be taken, and it all starts with understanding the weekly model. So essentially, every week the devs make sure that there is something for the game's community to enjoy. Every Friday we get a new piece of content, something fresh and hopefully exciting. This system also allows for regular bug fixes and balance changes too, which is really nice, but more importantly, it's a system that works. But does it work? Now on paper the weekly system sounds great, but the truth is it barely works. Most of the time we get half-baked pieces of content that feels rushed. Now sometimes that can work, for instance in the case of Deluvian, which was made in a day by the way, but in most cases it doesn't work. Carnival of Hearts doesn't work, Gladiators didn't work and feels rushed, Cereman Hollow feels rushed and incomplete, and guess what? Deluvian was the same. Deluvian did work, but it was extremely difficult, buggy and completely untested on release. Now I can't say that last bit for sure because I'm not a tester, but from the state of most things on release, it's pretty safe to assume most of the content we get isn't tested. I mean, if something straight up doesn't work on release, it definitely isn't tested, and if something that gets dropped is way too overtuned and ruins the game's balance, it isn't tested. I mean hell, Archmage didn't know that Glads was broken until 2 weeks after releasing it. That's not to throw shade, but to bring light to the fact that 1 week clearly isn't enough time to finish, test and polish content, and it shows because without fail almost every Friday we get half-baked, unpolished, untested and sometimes even unplayable content. Not to mention the fact that Glads is still broken. I tried to record some footage for it yesterday. Out of like the 4 or 5 times I tried to queue into it with my friends, I was only able to queue into it once, and other than that never able to play it again. Going back to my original point, the only reason we're getting this much unfinished or unpolished content is because of the weekly structure. But to the guys that know me and who've sat through some of these rant type videos, they know I wouldn't be doing all this complaining if I didn't have a solution and a better idea for this. Now the main alternative to the weekly model that you hear from the community is to adopt a monthly approach, and this idea was actually shot down for a very interesting reason. So apparently, according to Archmage, if they were to adopt a monthly approach, they would be procrastinating for most of the month and only locking for that last week, giving us essentially 1 week worth of content. Now, I mean no hate when I say this, but that is bullshit. It honestly feels like a massive cop-out because clearly the devs need more than 1 week to flesh out content. But if the owners do truly believe that they'll be making less content in the monthly model, then who am I to question that? But don't worry, I'm not done cooking. As much as I've been hating on weeklies, I do think they have some benefit. Remember when I said that getting weekly content balancing and bug fixes was nice? Well, the content is clearly arse, but the balancing and bug fixes is very nice. Though even that part of the weeklies is hardly focused on and negatively impacted by, the content section. It often appears like due to the rush nature of the weeklies, these two sections are often sacrificed, just so that the devs can push out a little bit more half-baked content that in itself doesn't even work most of the time on release, which results in power creep and bad balancing, where things like 2-bot assassination combos and mages with infinite ether go overlooked for months, while the game gets more and more buggy every update. And finally, down to what I'm actually suggesting, and that's to keep the weeklies, but only for bugs and balancing. This way the devs can really focus on the bugs and balancing and really fine-tune their game, because every week there'll be more focus placed on those two sections instead of worrying about a content section. They can create a proper balancing team that's not just full of chime sweats, but creators, gankers, people who've really played your game and know it well enough to balance it, and focus on the bugs that ruin the game's experience and making certain parts of the game literally unplayable upon release. And finally, move that beloved content and system section to either a monthly basis, which should be more than enough time to create, flesh out, test and polish content, or a bi-weekly schedule, just anything but 1 week. Because clearly you guys need more time to test out your game and work out the kinks before you release something. And even if what Archmage said was true, and that more time would only cause more procrastination and overall less content, I'd be okay with that, as long as the content we do get is tested, finished and polished. Because what would you rather, 5 updates of little balancing, small bug fixes and rushed and unfinished content, or 5 updates consisting of large amounts of fine-tuning the game's balance, a lot of bug fixes, coupled with 2 to 3 weeklies worth of content that's fully tested, finished and polished? I mean, hey, if you need any more proof for the devs needing more time, there's a reason they've been on a Saturday release streak for a while now. But what do I know, I'm just a stupid CC. Oh well, if Deepwoken dies off, I'm gonna be a wicked Runeslayer YouTuber, man.